So thank you for joining us today on this technical webinar. This is about VMware workloads on Azure as we talk about the Azure VMware Solution and its core capabilities. My name is Jim Richardson from Finchloom, and I brought with me our lead engineer and architect for our Azure infrastructure practice, Carey Neu. So today we're going to demonstrate what it looks like in the Azure VMware Solution. We're going to deep dive a little bit on the technical side to explain how some of the components work and show you how this could potentially play in to your organization. So first, at a high-level overview, the Azure VMware Solution is a comprehensive VMware environment. It runs your VMware workloads natively, and when it runs in Azure, it's providing all the support, licensing, and billing through one invoice. So no more paying Broadcom. All of the VMware licensing is included in Azure. And this can be extended from your organization on-prem to the cloud. So you could have a hybrid environment, and that enables you and your organization to continue to use the familiar VMware tools and use a simple migration process to move those VMware workloads across into Azure when you need to. We're going to start today with core capabilities of Azure VMware Solution. So let's start with talking about the familiar tooling. So Carey, are you familiar with the vSphere client? Do you use that a lot in VMware?
I do. I have for a long time, yeah.
And so what this enables you to do is to keep using the vSphere client when your workloads are in Azure. It's not very...
No, it's your standard kind of vSphere client that allows you to manage virtual machines, all your vSAN storage, your networking, and all the things you're familiar with when managing a VMware environment.
And so when you add VMware to Azure VMware Service, and you open the vSphere client, you'd see the Azure data center as a separate data center, right?
Correct.
So you could have your on-prem data center and your Azure data center in one vSphere client window, and you can migrate the machines between the two.
Yeah.
Okay. It's also seamless management of these workloads within the Azure portal. Once those workloads are in Azure, they can easily be scaled up or down. So for example, the machine size, right? Can you talk a little bit about machine sizing in Azure?
Well, there's three types of hosts you can do, right? So for your basic, you're allowed up to 96 hosts in your environment. That is the max. So that's the max that you can have in there. And you have three types. You have the basic, and then you have two other very high level hosts that you can have. And I think you can have up to 16 clusters. So it is very scalable. And it allows you to kind of, when you build out your AVS and then you pick your machine SKU size, it will provision that environment for you and allow you to reach out to it just like your on-prem environment.
And what I like is once you've got workloads in Azure, then you can add on enhancements like Azure monitoring, backup.
Azure Arc.
Yeah, and Azure Arc that extends out to your on-prem. Okay. So next we'll talk a little bit about the compute capabilities. You mentioned the different sizing of the compute that you can buy. So it looks like there's three different ones, right? There's an entry level AV36. And what's the AV36P? What makes that one different?
It actually uses it's a stronger processor, bigger processor, and it definitely has a bigger footprint. So more memory, more storage cache, etc.
So and I see the AV52 is only live in certain parts of the world.
Correct. Right. Yeah.
So if a customer in the US is looking at AV36 or AV36P, where do you suggest you start? Do you start small and then knowing that you can increase it?
Yeah, and before you even do AVS, you should be looking at regional availability, right? So like what you brought up, Jim, is look at what you're using. Definitely when you do your use cases, saying what are you looking for? What kind of horsepower do you need? And then look for the regions to see what is closest to you and what's available. Because capacity is very important in Azure. And it can, like if you, for example, if you're looking to move, it takes about 5 days to request capacity. So you make sure that when you're looking at a certain region, so if you're working in the US or whatever, look for your closest regional data center and then look for their capacity. So that's kind of what you want to do.
And isn't it true that in some cases you could actually put the resources in a region that you think would be too far away, but because of the fiber backbone in Azure, it's fine?
It's more of your compliance issue where you don't want your data to sit in another country or a certain region or something like that. But anything you put really, even in the public Azure, it's the fiber backbone, the Microsoft backplane is so fast that it's negligible. But generally, you do want to put it to the closest data center that you are.
Okay. All right. All right. So this talks about vSAN stretched clusters. What does that mean?
That means you, in most regions, not all regions in Azure, and they build it in 3 data centers. So you actually have 3 zones in Azure. So it allows you to stretch a cluster over multiple zones for a higher redundancy speed and higher return on like your recovery speeds. Yeah.
So it's almost like VMware then in a stretched cluster is automatic DR, and you don't need to apply an extra DR solution to it.
Correct.
Okay, that's great. Okay, then the networking for Azure VMware Solution. Can you kind of describe what we're seeing here on this slide?
Right. Yeah. So this is fundamental. One thing that is the learning curve for most people with AVS is the networking. Networking is kind of the most difficult piece for implementing an AVS solution because you generally do need an express route connection. Because remember, AVS is a private cloud. So you have Azure, which is a public cloud. AVS is private, which means it's really an extension of your on-premises or your colo, your data center, whatever, right? So you generally have to set up multiple connections, right? So you have your express route into AVS, but you can have your express route into the Azure or public cloud as well, right? And that connectivity is totally private.
Okay, and then here's an example of going on-prem straight to the dedicated data center.
And they're talking about global reach there, which means that you can now access not just different data centers in Azure, but also on-prem data centers. And that's what Express Route Global Reach means.
Great. And then there's also the VNet to AVS connectivity. So that means that the AVS can connect to your other resources.
Right. So natively, AVS does not talk to Azure natively. It's something you set up that connection to an existing Azure virtual network. And like you said, Jim, utilizing the tools in Azure to be able to kind of say, for example, you want to start moving your SQL servers to a SQL database or a SQL managed instance or using some of the Azure services, you would need to set up that VNet to VNet or the VNet connectivity, as they call it. Yes.
Got it. And then there's traditional VPN connectivity for users, right? In a
Correct.
POC, not recommended for production.
They actually are now saying that it is. I haven't seen it in action, but now they're saying that it is now kind of a supported. The only concern that I have is still on the site to sites is the bandwidth, right? The bandwidth for site to site is still quite limited, where ExpressRoute is significantly more. And that's the only thing. If you're moving a lot of work, if it's something where you're just accessing, you're moving workloads and they're staying there, but if you are doing a lot of moving of workloads between kind of on-prem to Azure, definitely should be looking more at the ExpressRoute.
Okay. And then this talks about enabling a public IP address to the edge. And that's so that your workloads can be exposed through that protected internet port.
Correct. Exactly.
And it provides other security like denial of service protection and using NSX Edge Manager to configure the network security. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the HCX. Can you explain this chart a little?
Yeah. So HCX is kind of the native tool with and it's the default tool for moving workloads between your on-premises VMware environment and the Azure virtual or the Azure VMware service system. So it's the tool, it's native, it's built in, and it's what people are familiar with right now when you are moving workloads.
What I like is it says 0 downtime on live migrations.
Yeah, you have both, right? You have the one for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, you have the parallel one and you have the live one as well, exactly.
Okay. All right, now we'll get into the storage a little bit and talk about how the storage works. One of the things that I know is that you can use native Azure storage for your solution, but also there are partners like Pure Storage and NetApp who provide their storage that work very well with Azure VMware Solution.
And significantly faster too, Jim. Yeah.
Great. So it makes it essentially a hyper-converged system. Okay, so here's a chart that goes over the different disks. Would you kind of just run us through from the low end to the high end and where the benefits are according to the cost?
Right. So generally your standard HDD, something you really don't use for production VMs or whatever. It's more for websites, your low-cost storage, certain things that you just need to kind of dump there, make sure it's there and backed up, etc. So it's something you don't want to do. Standard SSD is now we're in the SSD world, so definitely a more consistent performance, still economical, but your IOPS are still low, and it's something that I just don't recommend for anything high performance required like SQL Server or anything that you're trying to do some significant work. And then you have your premium SSD, right? So those are where a little bit more costly. You can kind of manage the IOPS and the burst mode, so it gives you kind of better bang for your buck for kind of your IO intensive. Ultra, they just announced just recently and significantly faster, but significantly more expensive.
Yeah. And same thing with Elastic SAN. Is that the most expensive?
Yeah, it's still out there right now, and it's just like being able to expand over different storage and containers, etc. Right? So
Okay. And do we recommend that we start Azure VMware Solution on the premium SSD,
that's
right?
what I was going to say. Yeah, and definitely, and then you can switch after. Yeah.
Okay. And then here is that NetApp integration that we talked about through the partner integration with NetApp. You've had experience integrating Azure NetApp, haven't you?
I have quite a bit of experience with it. When the performance of standard premium SSD and generally the NetApp files, and I don't want to talk too about it, but I do believe we got significance. Like we're talking 100% improvement in performance when we're doing some analysis and stuff like that. So it is well worth it to go into
Wow.
any of those third party if you need the speed.
Yeah, if it's your mission critical production app and you need that power, it's available for you.
And you can do NFS and SMB on the same share, which is amazing.
Okay. And then there's some security and compliance tools that are built into Azure VMware Solution. Would you talk a little bit about what's integrated in Azure versus what VMware provides?
So Azure has a lot of different tools that you can use to kind of secure the solution, right? So definitely anything that's in Azure data centers, they're all certified data center hardware, the environment, all the secure edge, DDoS protection, etc. Anything that's running in Azure has the built-in encryption. You can use the key vault to lock securities and the whole bit. And then if you do, you can expand upon it and kind of add things outside with the Azure environment to secure any workloads you have there as well. And then on the VMware environment, you just like most of the hypervisors, the data encryption at rest and in motion, and then encrypted traffic when you're using vMotion to move workloads.
And then the last one, the private cloud security, are sort of the things that a company can do on top of what Azure and VMware are already doing, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Here's some certifications that Azure has in their data centers. So if you have a certain need for those certifications, you can look on this list and see. I think the ones that we're most familiar with are PCI and SOC. So I see that those are in there as well as HIPAA. And then here's a little chart about the private cloud data security. One thing that you brought up in the very beginning of this presentation is that AVS is actually in a private instance of the Azure public cloud. I didn't know that. So that's really interesting. And because of that, it gives you the ability to bring your own keys, control your encryption, and protect your data at rest. So have you ever dealt with customers that bring their own keys?
Definitely when security is, especially in the banking industry and the healthcare industry, bringing your own keys for encryption or any kind of things that you're setting, definitely a lot of customers will use. And like I talked about is the key vault. So the key vault's where you securely store keys, passwords, secrets, whatever, and it follows your FIPS 2 v3 compliance requirements for a lot of industries.
Okay. And then we talk about shared responsibilities. And what that means is Microsoft will take the responsibility for the underlying infrastructure, but you, as an IT department for your organization, still have certain responsibilities, although they're much less than they used to be when you ran VMware on-prem. So, Carey, could you tell a little bit about what customers still need to do for their own responsibility piece?
Right, because it's really then I'll get what I'm saying. Usually, it's similar to like a PaaS service, right? So Microsoft is managing the ESXi host, so you don't have access to the ESXi host and stuff like that. Is you're managing using your vCenter and your client is you're managing the applications, the virtual machines, you're using the same tools you're used to and moving things around. You don't have to worry about the host. If there's an issue with the host, you don't have to worry about patching the I think it's right now it's ESXi 7 that VMware is running right now. You don't have to worry about any of that. You worry more about what you're delivering to the customer, what you're providing the customer, and Microsoft worries about hardening and securing the back end. So all the hosts.
So you kind of just get back to deploying Windows and Linux servers, right?
Exactly.
And then managing what's inside of those servers.
Correct.
Okay. Here's a little diagram that shows the blue boxes are what Microsoft handles, and the gray boxes are what the customer handles. And you can imagine configuration of your VMware is the customer responsibility. Okay, and then the last slide, talking about the core capabilities, we talk about the cloud migration strategies. And let's go one by one. And can you talk a little bit about rehosting?
Yes. So that's really taking what you have on premises and moving it to the cloud, right? So generally, Microsoft has a great tool called the Azure Migrate utility that will give you an assessment on what workload you have, do a little bit of an asset inventory, and then it will tell you what it would look like in Azure, how much it's going to cost, etc. And then you would use your HCX utilities to move or migrate or replicate those virtual machines to Azure. That is rehost.
Do you happen to know a time frame of how long it would take to migrate a host? I guess it depends on the size and the internet connection, right?
Exactly. 100% exactly.
Okay. But it's zero downtime, right? Because it all
Yep.
syncs in the
Yep.
background. You plan your
Exactly.
cutover, and it's the least risky move.
Yep.
It's the easiest way to get rid of the hardware that's aging out. So you don't have to buy a new giant hypervisor to host your workloads on-prem. Okay, the second method, whoops, let me go back. Oh, wait. So this talks about the rehosting. So simplifying that, there's some guidance of how to do rehosting. And you just sort of mentioned it. You plan, you do your assessment, then you provision AVS and connect to it. Then you use HCX to migrate.
Right.
Okay, so let's talk about that assessment. This is something that we provide at Finchloom, right?
Correct. So we'll help you. We'll help you download. What you do is there's an OVA that you download from. You have to have an Azure subscription. So you can have an Azure subscription, which we can provide you, and you download the OVA. You implement the OVA in your VMware environment. It's an appliance that's already self-configured, and then you just run the assessment. And that assessment, you run it for. Generally, we like to run it. You can get the assessment details in about an hour, but generally, we like to run it for a little bit just to give you a good idea on the kind of the metrics that is running in your environment. And then from there, you'll get, like you can see on the screen there, is a good idea of what the monthly cost would look like, and then the estimate per VM, et cetera, right? So it gives you kind of good estimate of storage and CPU, et cetera. And then you can go, and if you go back, it shows you kind of Azure readiness, the VM host, how it can be migrated, et cetera, right? So that's going a little bit more into the assessment, but that's the tool.
And this assessment can be run, and if you decide not to move forward, you can just break this down and it's no harm, no foul, right?
Exactly. Just remove the appliance and you're good to go. Yeah.
There's no commitment here. It's just to give you an idea of what it would look like to run as is in Azure.
Yep, correct.
Okay, so here's a demo.
Hello, my name is Jim and I work in the IT department at Contoso Healthcare. Contoso has been using VMware for many years, and I'm really excited to be able to bring my VMware-based applications to Azure so I can get the benefits in the cloud as we grow. Let's get started. So here I am at the Contoso homepage. This is the face of our growing company. Next, you see my vaccine registration app where I collect a lot of PII from customers who want information about upcoming vaccines. Here you see the Azure portal, and I've got everything I need to go manage my VMware environment in Azure. I've got my AVS private cloud, my access to vCenter via the jump box. I've also got the same information for the environment that I've built out in South Central right here on the bottom row. Now that my cloud environments are good to go, let me start using them. Like most VMware admins, I'm going to start with the on-premise instance of the vSphere client. This one is themed in dark blue so you can tell the difference versus the white instance in the cloud when I show it later. As an admin, vSphere gives me everything I need to manage my environment in its very own private cloud. From here, VMware and Azure make it easy to move my website from on-premises to my East US data center where I have cloud capacity. I launch VMware HCX, I bring up their migration wizard. You see I simply step through some defaults and some basic information, and in a matter of minutes, I'm ready to go start the process of moving my application from on-premise to the cloud. Once I hit validate and I hit go, VMware goes through the process of moving the VM, and because I'm using an L2 stretch network, you'll see that the Contoso application now reloads in the new data center, and I had to make no networking configuration changes. Now with that done and out of the way, I have a lot more capacity for my vaccine information app on premises, but it's still vulnerable to catastrophic failure. With products like Jetstream, a new breed of zero RPO DRES products, it makes it possible for me to protect my on-premise environment using the cloud. So here I am in my on-premise vSphere environment. I go to the Jetstream configuration, and what you notice is that it's been set up to store the data from each VM and stream it into Azure Blob storage. The replication status between my on-prem and cloud environment is up to date. And now, in the event of a catastrophic failure, all I would have to do is flip it over to keep myself alive. Notice that it's been replicating state for the last few days, so we're up to date in the cloud. A bit later, an incident occurs, and I get a notification that my online vaccine registration app is offline. Now, in order to bring it back online, all I have to do is go into my vCenter portal. Now I'm going to log into the cloud environment that we set up earlier for recovery using Jetstream and go back into the Jetstream environment. You'll see that instead of configuring, it's ready to complete the activation of the cloud node. So I'll click complete. The process will start and Jetstream will go through and complete all the final steps. After a few seconds, you'll see that we can go back to the website and now link again to the vaccine registration app because it's up and it's been pointing to my East US data center. So the cloud has really helped me recover this application pretty easily. That's it. We're done. Today, you've seen how I use Azure VMware Solution to help customers easily bring their VMware applications to the cloud. Thank you.
All right, that was a nice little demo. And here, this talks about using the HCX as your tool for migration. Just like you had said earlier, it's the native tool, and it allows for ease of migration. Now, this shows a hybrid environment. So let's put it all together. Can you talk a little bit about what's being shown here, where HCX is being used with the on-prem environment to migrate some workloads to the Azure?
You have to set up a kind of an HCX pairing so that you pair, so that you create that hybrid environment, and then using the NSXT, you pick the workloads that you want to replicate, and then you will migrate them to Azure VMware services. You have to have that pairing set up. That's kind of like called a stretch network. It's really making a hybrid network, but it requires an HCX pairing to do that. That is set up when you do it in the, that's probably the most complex thing to set up, is that NXT networking environment, which I talked about earlier, is probably the heaviest lift for setting up the AVS environment. It's making sure you set those pairing up correctly.
It's like building the highway so that they can get to Azure.
Right. And the proper segments, the L2, they call it, like the L2 network. Yeah.
Right. And here it's showing the stretch network enables the communication without tromboning. Do you know what that means?
I don't.
I imagine a musical instrument going.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right. So that was our presentation about the core capabilities of Azure VMware Solution. Now we're going to jump into the next section, which talks about the common use cases or the scenarios that customers use Azure VMware Solution for. Now, this shows a couple of different common use cases. On the left-hand side, you may have an on-prem VMware environment, and you want to use the cloud to help burst. So you enable Azure to be your disaster recovery and business continuity side, or expand your data center, or reduce or retire your data center by moving into Azure. There's other total cost of ownership opportunities too. When you run out of lifespan on your hardware, your hyper-converged hardware, you have opportunities to increase the speed and simplification of your VMware environment. You can also then modernize your applications by using some of the additional Azure components once those workloads are moved in. So could you talk a little bit about these three different disaster recovery options that customers would have?
Yeah. There was one thing I wanted to talk about, Jim, and that's one thing you're saying is the cloud bursting, right? So the cloud bursting.
Let me go back.
Yeah. Cloud bursting is a big thing right now. So because the beauty of the cloud is it's scalable, right? So a lot of times if you need that extra horsepower, you can generate it in the cloud, right? So if you have certain workloads, and that's one of the biggest common use cases that they're talking about besides DR is that cloud bursting, being able to apply as much horsepower as needed to run that certain workload and then scale it back when you don't need it, right? And that's what we're finding now in the industry is needing that horsepower, but then not paying for it all the time, right? So that's the beauty of the cloud. Just like in the public cloud, the same in AVS is being able to say, you know what, I want to run that in the cloud because I need as much horsepower, and then I want it to shut down again, right? So sorry, Jim.
In the United States, we've got this thing called Black Friday where people go spend a ton of money during the holidays. And that would be a time where certain e-commerce websites and databases would want to have extra capacity. So they would use cloud bursting for maybe November, December, and then move those workloads back to on-prem to live on the older hardware. Yep. So there's definitely common scenarios there, and you'd only pay for the time that you're using the burst, which is great.
Yep.
Okay, so now back to the DR options. Could you go through the three different ways?
So you have, which is the standard one from on-prem to AVS, right? So a lot of people already have another data center for their disaster recovery, right? So instead of paying for another physical data center and hardware, et cetera, is creating an AVS environment and using AVS as your disaster recovery area. And the beauty of that as well is, like some days, like you talked about, Jim, is like, okay, you know what? We can start deprecating some of the hardware now because we already have it. So we're now starting to kind of become cloud aware. We're starting to put things in the cloud to start utilizing the cloud. So it's not only a good way of backing up your environment and not having to pay for that separate data center, you've now kind of started the path to migrating to the cloud, and you can start building upon that. And then from AVS to AVS, and it is what it is kind of having two AVS environments and replicating that data to another private cloud. So you'd have two private AVS environments, and then from AVS to Azure services. So that would be going from your private cloud to your public cloud. So kind of backing up or replicating that data into the public cloud.
And I see the partner solutions at the bottom. So does this mean that VMware Site Recovery Manager works natively in this solution
Correct.
as well?
Yes, and we've actually used that for a lot of from on-prem to Azure. We've used the site recovery services for that, so it does work quite well. Yeah.
So this goes into the specific use case of disaster recovery with HCX. And it looks like on the left-hand side, one of our on-prem virtual machines had a failure, and then AVS is used to recover that VM on-prem. Here's another one where VMware Site Recovery Manager is being used. Scenario 1 is from on-prem to AVS. Scenario 2 is AVS to AVS. Maybe you want to have a secondary AVS site in a different region, so you provide that data center redundancy. And then this looks complicated. Is it Zerto? Zerto is the third-party disaster recovery. So it allows you to do replication via Zerto, and then the replication then allows you to fail over to Azure. Also, Jetstream, as was shown in the demo, is a way to do continuous synchronization to an Azure blob storage. And does that make it cheaper because you're just replicating to blob storage?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And then when
it'd be the same. It's similar to the Azure Site Recovery, which is built into Azure, where you're dumping disk files into blob storage and then bringing them up or hydrating, as it says, when they're needed.
Yeah. Correct. Okay. So it's sort of a cheap DR or least expensive DR because you're not building the machines until you need them.
Correct.
Okay. And then here's a hybrid where you may have on-premise and Azure together. AVS is used for the web layer, and HCX enables that communication between the two. We've also heard about data center changes. So some customers are up for a lease renewal on their data center, and the increase of the lease has gone way up, or they just simply want to remove a physical footprint and get out of the data center entirely. And this is all possible through AVS as well. Now, this is one of my favorites, is app modernization. A lot of times you can't modernize your apps if they're stuck on old infrastructure. So by moving the VMware workloads into Azure, it opens up a whole new possibility to use Azure Active Directory for identity and authentication, the Azure Gateway for load balancing, and other Azure tools, including AI components to modernize your applications. All right, would you walk us through this integration slide with storage?
Well, like we talked about earlier, is using Azure NetApps or whatever. It allows you to integrate using the Azure public cloud to use existing storage services, right? So once, like we talked about, is setting up that VNet connection between the Azure virtual networks, and then you're going to set up storage. So based on your requirements, do you need, like we talk about, a blob storage, or do we need access to a super fast NetApps or pure storage or pure simple storage in the Azure environment? So it's really connecting to services in Azure and then kind of building out those services, and you have those native access to those Azure services.
And then here's another picture that kind of demonstrates the different opportunities you have.
Yep, exactly.
And then there's also Azure SQL. So you don't just have file services, you have SQL services. And so as you migrate your VMware workloads across and they're running SQL database, you have options to modernize into a platform-based SQL database or a managed instance. All right, now this is your favorite topic, Carey, total cost of ownership. So on a previous slide, we talked about cloud bursting for extra capacity when you need it for seasonal need. There's also global cloud bursting to take your workloads and burst them out to your global workforce and put those workloads closer to where those individuals work. And then also the transition from the VDI environment to Azure Virtual Desktop. So today, if you have VMware and you're running Virtual Desktop, you may be sharing server desktops. In Azure Virtual Desktop service, you'll be sending out Windows desktops. So it'll be the PC-based end user desktop. And it helps you to significantly reduce your VDI costs as well. That's one of your specialties, right? Azure Virtual Desktop.
It is, and like you said, and like a lot of services in Azure, it utilizes all your existing infrastructure. So your Entra ID, your Azure AD, your MFA, it's all built in. So if you already have an M365 presence, it's already integrated to all that. So your licensing and everything is included.
Nice. Here's a hardware end of life use case. So again, there's customers that bought that 10-year converged hypervisor, and it's in its 9th year. So what are you going to do? Are you going to buy another one and go through 10 more years on-prem depreciating your asset? Or do you want to move into Azure and take advantage of the abilities to burst and add on additional services and modernize your apps with AI? So this is a great driver for looking at this solution, is that the hardware you have today may be coming to an end of life. All right, Carey, we're going to move on to our third section, and it's about getting the most out of Azure. And this really talks about how we can help this customer get familiar with Azure VMware Solution and how we can help them deploy it. So first, there's some important questions about how it works. Microsoft bills you, or if you buy your Azure subscription through Finchloom, we bill you. So it's one line item for your Azure VMware Solution. And that one line item contains all the VMware licensing. So it's paid through the Azure subscription. You no longer get a bill from Broadcom to pay for VMware. And then for support, Microsoft provides the support of the underlying infrastructure, and they'll work with VMware on your behalf to solve any underlying infrastructure issue. And as a partner, if you buy the Azure subscription for us, we front end all of that for you, so you don't have to deal with the front lines of Microsoft support. We also have ways to help you understand and optimize your licensing benefits. So Carey, I see here on this slide, there's a couple of different options. What do you normally talk to customers about when we talk about these options? Could you share some of your thoughts?
Sure. So in the left column, obviously pay as you go. So that's obviously what you use, you pay for. It's something that it's now the way that Microsoft structures their reserved instances and the savings plan. It doesn't make a lot of sense to do pay as you go. Pay as you go is good when you first start out to understand your utilization and your usage. And once you're in for like 3 months or 6 or 2 months, you are recommended. It is recommended because, for example, the reserved instances, because AVS, those hosts aren't going away, right? It's not like so if you have 3 hosts, paying reserved instances for 1 or 3 years gets you an automatic discount on those 3 hosts, right? So it's a significant savings, and it's something well to look at. Savings plan is more for your total Azure spend. You save a little bit less, but it's a savings plan based on all of your Azure spend. But definitely for the AVS solution, looking at RI reserved instances is definitely a recommended way to go once you've kind of built up the environment, because there's no point in spending full pop when you can save money for the things you're using already, right? So
okay,
in the middle, so go ahead, Jim.
I was going to take the middle as the licensing piece.
Sure, yeah, definitely.
So customers today that have software assurance, maybe you bought Windows Server, SQL Server on an enterprise agreement, and those have transformed into perpetual licenses. You can use the Azure hybrid benefit, and as you move those workloads in, you can save on the cost of the Azure VMs because you've already paid for the operating system and the SQL Server. So we can help you navigate that. Also, if you're running older versions of Windows or SQL Server, when you move those workloads into Azure, you automatically get free extended security updates, which extends the patches that you get for Windows and SQL Server for an additional 3 years. If you were on-prem, you'd have to pay for that extra 3 years of extended security updates. So in Azure, it's included for free. And then lastly, you'll have to talk with VMware representatives, or we can work with your Microsoft rep to bring them in. But there may be some offers provided to you from VMware. There's coupons or credit offers that you can bring with you when you use Azure VMware Solution. So those are some things that we can do to help you understand the total cost of ownership and get you discounts and optimize your spend. So this talks about a software and hardware package, and this just goes back into the different specs that were entry-level specs for this solution, and it shows you the versions of those those solutions on the left. Azure VMware Solution is currently available on the dark blue bubbles, pretty much everywhere in the world, coming soon to the West US 3. And then here's a little roadmap. Have you heard the roadmap for this, Carey?
No, I haven't.
So it looks like there's some global disaster recovery coming, VMware Site Recovery Manager. Oh, these are already things that are in play. Stretch clusters, things that we've talked about already are available. The coming soon is the Azure Arc integration and the disk pooling. All right, so let's wrap it up. Would you take us through these 3 slides here? Or you want me to do this one?
Yeah, if you could do it, Jim, please. I was just reading.
This isn't technical. All right, so to wrap up, we talked about cloud efficiencies that will outweigh your current on-prem economics over time. So if you're looking at getting rid of a data center, getting rid of your servers, there's some efficiencies to be gained by moving to Azure. Secondly, seamlessly integrate VMware with flexible options. Your staff gets to keep the VMware skills that they've learned. They get to use the same tools, and it's a very simple integration, except for the networking piece, into Azure. And then finally, you get predictability in your licensing costs as you migrate and modernize at your pace, and you can lock in some of those savings for long term. When it comes to Finchloom, we can help you invest more time in creating value rather than managing and integrating your data estate. So let us help you and partner with you on this journey. The first thing is Carey wants to work with you and do the VMware assessment. And this will give you your options to migrate to Azure, along with the predicted pricing and some Azure optimizations that you could consider to lower your total cost of ownership. This assessment is offered starting at $5,000 as a fixed price, and it's available on the Microsoft Marketplace. If you search for Finchloom VMware Assessment, it'll come up in the Azure Marketplace. We've also got a ton of experience deploying VMware and deploying Azure infrastructure. So we've got the experience. We've done these deployments before. Carey's been working with VMware for over 20 years now. We've also got managed services. So once you get your VMware workloads into Azure, we can help manage those workloads for you. Server and OS patching, server and OS monitoring, reboots, and other care and feeding. We also provide engineering and admin level support on a time and materials basis. And we provide Microsoft break-fix support on a time and materials basis with an escalation to Microsoft through our partner channel. And through these integrations and our partnership, we've helped a lot of customers get rid of their expiring data center contracts, get rid of their aging out hardware, and really start to embrace the Azure cloud modernization path. So Carey, wanted to thank you for joining me today. Do you have any last words for the customers watching this?
I definitely do recommend going through the assessment. It's something that gives you kind of some insight onto, it may not be this year, it may be in a couple of years, but it's definitely worth looking at what would it look like in Azure, what would it cost, and what are the benefits, right? So it's definitely worth a look at. And like you said, Jim, it's helping you get to the cloud, right? So that's something to help you kind of get your environment, but still be comfortable in the tools that you're using to manage your environment.
Great. And I'm going to post a link in the comments. If you click on that link, it'll take you to our Azure VMware Solution landing page. You can download our ebook for free, read the infographics, and sign up for a meeting with us where we can talk about pricing capabilities and get Carey on the phone to talk about getting you a VMware assessment for your environment. Thanks again for joining us today. I'm Jim Richardson for Carey Neu at Finchloom. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.